While Sherlock Holmes chased a madman with a mutilated thumb, another case unfolded quietly in the shadow of Baker Street. One Holmes never solved. A missing soldier, a secret clinic, and a doctor forced to become the detective. This is the secret case Dr. John Watson never published. Until now. If you love classic mysteries, deep character stories, and hidden chapters in famous lives, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss a story from the shadows of history. It was during one of Holmes's more singular engagements, concerning the unfortunate civil engineer and the hydraulic press, that I found myself, for the better part of 2 days, alone at our quarters in Baker Street. My companion had departed in a whirlwind of coattails and muttered deductions, promising, as he often did, a tale most extraordinary upon his return. I had resigned myself to a quiet evening, with only the low hiss of the fire and the soft rustle of the lancet for company, when there came a knock at the door, sharp, twice, then hesitant. It was not Mrs. Hudson's customary rap, nor the brisk authority of a constable. I laid down my paper. "Come in," I called, though the latch had not been lifted. A pause followed, and then the door opened slowly to reveal a woman, slight in frame and dressed in morning gray, her hands clutching a small velvet reticule that trembled with each breath she drew. "Dr. Watson?" she asked, voice nearly lost in the hush of the room. "I am he," I said, rising at once. "Pray, do come in. You appear unwell." She stepped forward, though hesitantly, as though each footfall brought her closer to something terrible. I was told Mr. Holmes might be found here." "Indeed, you were correctly informed. Unfortunately, Mr. Holmes is presently away on a case. However," I added, gesturing for her to sit, "if you are in distress, I shall be glad to hear you out. I am his confidant, and at times, his assistant." She seated herself, lips pursed as if weighing the worth of what she carried against the disappointment of my presence. Then, from her reticule, she drew a folded sheet, yellowed, stained at one corner, and visibly worn from repeated reading. "This is all I have left of my husband," she said. "A letter. He wrote it before he vanished, again." "Again?" I queried gently, unfolding the page. "Yes," she said. "James Graves. A soldier. He was thought lost in the war in Afghanistan." "Your war, doctor?" "But he returned home after months. They said it was a clerical error, that he had never died." I nodded slowly, scanning the page. The handwriting was tight, angular, more like a man trained to encrypt than to confess. "And now?" I asked. "Gone again. 2 weeks ago. Without a word. Only this letter, left on my pillow." The contents were strange. The letter was neither farewell nor confession, but spoke obliquely of debts unpaid, of the silent men, and of something called the Eden Ward. My brow furrowed. There was fear in every line, but also intent, the kind that begged decoding. "Have you gone to the police?" I asked. She shook her head. "They said he was likely mad. That war makes men vanish in their own minds." "Not always," I murmured. "Mr. Holmes, he could find James. I read your stories. I know what the two of you have done." I folded the letter, and in doing so, made a decision I did not take lightly. "My dear Mrs. Graves," I said, "though my friend is not here, I give you my word, this case shall not go unexamined. I shall take it up myself." Her eyes widened. "You will." "I will," I said. "It is time I put my own faculties to the test." And as the door closed behind her, I felt it, the old thrill I had known in the war, the sharp scent of purpose mingled with danger. But this time, the battlefield would be London, and I would stand not behind Holmes, but in the shadow he left behind. The following morning broke pale and sodden, a gray drizzle misting the panes of our sitting-room windows and muting the usual noise of Baker Street. Holmes was still absent, no telegram nor footprint hinting at his return. I placed Mrs. Graves' letter carefully beside my breakfast plate, the edge curling like a question mark beside my toast and eggs. As I read it again, my medical instincts stirred. The language was fragmentary, yet deliberately so, as though it masked some deeper structure. Sentences like, "I saw the garden again, but the gardeners were masked," Or, they call it Eden. But there are no fruits, only needles. These were not the wild ravings of a shell-shocked mind. There was method here, submerged like reef beneath tide. I dressed in haste and made my way to the records office of the Royal Army Medical Corps, a place I had not entered since my own return from the East. The clerk, a red-cheeked youth who had clearly never tasted service beyond the fog of Whitehall, raised a brow at my request. James Graves, Sergeant, 2nd Battalion, Northumberland Fusiliers. I should like to consult his file, particularly the discharge summary. You a relation? The boy asked. I am his attending physician, I said flatly, producing my medical credentials. The seal of Bart's had a way of loosening tight bureaucratic knots. He grumbled and disappeared among the pigeonholes. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. I was just considering whether to lean over the counter and conduct the search myself when he returned, a slim folder in hand, his expression perplexed. This the fellow, sir? Seems he died in '89. But look here, same name, same regiment. Another discharge recorded in early '90. He handed me the papers. Indeed, 2 separate entries under the same service number. The first, a notice of death from injuries sustained at Maywand. The second, a record of convalescence and subsequent discharge for neurasthenia and psychological instability. The clerical inconsistency was glaring. How often, I asked, does a dead man walk himself to a second discharge? The clerk blinked. S'pose not often, sir. No, I muttered, closing the folder. Not often at all. On the pavement once more, I turned up my collar against the drizzle. A man could not die twice on paper without someone's pen guiding the error. I lit a cigarette, staring into the smoke as it curled toward the clouds. What game had Graves stumbled into? The letter had mentioned Pimlico. I hailed a cab. As we rattled through the streets, I considered what Holmes might have done in my position. But I knew, too, that this case was not his, not yet. This one had come to me, and I would see it through. Even in war, I recalled Graves had once written, a man knows when he is being watched by more than just the enemy. The cab deposited me in a narrow street off Warwick Way, where rows of lean brick houses huddled together like secrets too long kept. Number 47 stood with its curtains drawn, paint peeling from the sill, and a listless sprig of rosemary wilting in a pot by the door. The sort of place that might once have been cheerful, but had since learned better. I knocked twice. After a delay, the door creaked open, revealing a woman of middle years with wiry hair and a complexion that spoke to overuse of gin. Her eyes narrowed the instant they met mine. Not Taquine lodgers, she said, already moving to shut the door. I'm not here for a room, I interjected, placing a foot firmly across the threshold. Dr. John Watson. I'm inquiring after a former tenant, James Graves. She froze, eyes flicking to the street behind me. You with the police? No, I replied, producing my card. I am a physician. Mr. Graves' wife is concerned. I'm here on her behalf. The landlady, Mrs. Patch, she reluctantly admitted, hesitated, then opened the door fully. Come in, then. But I don't want no trouble. The interior was dim and smelled faintly of damp wool and liniment. She led me into a parlor whose furnishings looked as if they had been pawned and recovered more than once. A threadbare armchair, an ash-choked hearth, and a sagging settee made up the room's comforts. Graves, she said, wringing her hands, was here for a month or so. Quiet sort, paid his rent in half-crowns. But strange, very strange. In what way? I prompted, taking note of her shaking fingers. He'd be out all night some days, back before dawn. Other times, he'd lock himself in and talk to the walls. Said he had to stay ahead of the gardeners. Her voice dropped. Once I found him burnin' paper in the grate. Said it was dangerous to leave him whole. Then he was gone. No note. Just his coat left on the peg. Did he receive visitors? She blinked. Only 2. Men from some charity. Help for veterans, I think. Well-dressed. Carried doctor's bags. Names? I asked. She shook her head. Never gave one. But they left something behind once. She disappeared into a cupboard and returned with a crumpled pamphlet. Restoration Through Discipline, the Eden Trust for Veterans of Foreign Conflict. I took it gingerly. Did you read it? She shook her head again. Couldn't make sense of it. Full of talk about psychic gardening and moral soils. Sounded mad, if you ask me. As I turned to leave, my gaze caught upon a damp patch on the skirting board near the fireplace. She noticed me noticing. Leaky pipe, she offered too quickly. But I smelled it. A bitter, metallic trace beneath the coal smoke. Laudanum. I tucked the pamphlet into my pocket and turned to the door. Thank you, Mrs. Patch. You've been most helpful. I don't want no part in whatever mess he's in, Doctor, she called after me. Outside, the drizzle had thickened to a curtain. I stood under the lip of the awning, the pamphlet open in my hands. Its symbol was a serpent twined about a tree, an inversion of the rod of Asclepius. Beside it, a Latin motto, Sileo et sano, be silent and heal. And I knew then, Graves had not run from madness. He had run from something far more dangerous. Men who had given madness a name and a doctrine. It was well after sundown when I arrived at the St. Agnes Refuge for Veterans on Vauxhall Bridge Road, a soot-streaked building whose windows glowed dully like tired eyes behind spectacles. Its sign, chipped and sagging on rusted chains, bore the promise. Shelter, dignity, purpose. Inside, the air was thick with liniment and boiled potatoes. A few dozen men slouched across benches and cots, their faces a gallery of fatigue, bearing the 1,000-yard stare known only to those who had seen men die by inches. I passed through with the deference of one who had shared their long silence once, long ago, and approached a small counter where a volunteer scribbled into a logbook. I'm Dr. Watson, I said gently, formerly of the 5th Northumberland, now civilian. I should like to offer medical consultations, free of charge. The woman looked up, kind-eyed, perhaps a nurse in better days. You'll find them in the back hall. Not many talk, but they'll come to you if they're hurting. Thank you, I replied, and set about preparing an impromptu clinic with what little I had in my bag. They came, one by one. A man with shrapnel still embedded behind the knee. Another with a persistent tremor. Shells had taken their toll, but so too had silence. In each face, I searched for Graves, or a whisper of him. At last, a thin man with one eye and the build of a former cavalryman sat before me. He had the sunken cheeks of the laudanum-hungry, and yet there was keenness in his remaining eye. Name? I asked, taking his pulse. Peterson. Charlie Peterson. You served. He gave a bitter chuckle. What's left of me did. You're the second doctor this month with questions. I paused, pen hovering. Who was the first? Didn't say his name. Fancy coat, gloves in summer. Asked about a fellow, quiet chap limped. Looked like he hadn't slept since Kandahar. James Graves. He nodded slowly. That's the one. Said he was being followed. Kept speaking of gardens and blood. I thought he'd gone soft in the head, till the night he vanished. What happened? Peterson leaned forward. 2 men came, said they were from a veterans trust. Talked smooth, smiled too much. Next morning, Graves was gone. No one saw him leave. Did you hear anything? I asked. He looked around, then whispered. Horses' hooves. 2 sets. And something heavy dragging. One of the men had a limp, but he didn't use a cane. My pen stilled. Peterson leaned back, studying me. You ain't like the others. How so? You're listening, he said, with a voice dry as ash. And you look like you know fear. Outside, the mist had thickened into a full London fog, the sort that eats sound and blurs shape. I left by the side entrance, coat drawn tight, pamphlet folded in my pocket. Somewhere behind me, a carriage creaked through the gloom, the sound too slow, too precise. I turned quickly, but saw nothing. Yet the hair on my neck bristled as it had only once before, stepping into an ambush at Maywand. Not all ghosts wear shrouds. Some wear leather gloves and carry black bags. And they do not haunt, they hunt. The fog thickened as I crossed over to Baker Street, a dense and oily thing that clung to the brick and soot of London like a shroud. Gas lamps glowed dimly through the murk, their light refracted into watery halos that made shadows twist and multiply. As I neared our lodgings, I became aware of a second set of footfalls. Light, deliberate, and just beyond the edge of perception. I stopped abruptly. So did they. When I resumed, they followed, careful, measured. I am no Holmes, but I am not without instinct. The war had taught me the feeling of being watched, and the sensation now was unmistakable. I turned suddenly into a tobacconist's shop just before our door, feigning interest in a tin of Latakia blend. As I glanced through the dusty window, I caught the briefest glimpse of a figure, tall, gloved, and disappearing into the fog. I purchased the tobacco regardless, so as not to betray my ruse, and stepped back into the street. By the time I reached our door, the street was once again still. Mrs. Hudson greeted me with her customary concern. "Oh, Dr. Watson." Mr. Holmes returned not an hour ago, stormed in, sopping and triumphant, but refused supper and went straight upstairs. I ascended at once. Holmes stood in the center of the sitting room, removing his coat with the precision of a man shedding not cloth, but pretense. He turned as I entered, eyes alight. "Watson, I have just returned from Aford. Fascinating case. Hydraulics, mutilation, and German ingenuity. You shall hear it all in good time. I trust it proved fruitful?" "Quite, though the villain slipped through my fingers for the moment." "No matter. His thumbprint shall not." He flung himself into the chair opposite mine, steepling his fingers. "And you, my dear doctor, have you found the quiet life rejuvenating in my absence?" I met his gaze, calm but resolute. "Not entirely. I had a caller in your stead. A lady, recently bereaved of her husband, Sergeant James Graves." Holmes's brow twitched. "The name is unfamiliar." "I imagine it would be. He was thought dead, declared so by the army, and then, miraculously, discharged a year later. He has since vanished again, left only a letter and a trail most curious." "Indeed? And you took the case?" His tone was amused, almost indulgent. "I did." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "How deliciously uncharacteristic of you." "I thought," I said evenly, "that the matter deserved attention. His wife came in good faith, and I could not in good conscience turn her away." Holmes leaned back, studying me with an expression I could not place. Part admiration, part curiosity. "My dear fellow, if you wish to play the sleuth, you need only say so." "This is not a game, Holmes," I replied, perhaps more sharply than intended. "I believe this man is in danger, or was, and others may yet suffer." Holmes smiled faintly, but there was no mockery in it. "You have the soul of a knight, Watson, though you wear the armor of a doctor. I shall not pry. Yet I caution you, there are currents in this city darker than even you imagine. If you intend to pursue them, keep your revolver close and your trust closer." With that, he turned back to his violin, and the conversation was ended. For the first time since meeting Sherlock Holmes, I held a secret of my own, and I intended to keep it, not out of pride, but out of necessity. The shadows had taken James Graves. I meant to follow them alone. I resolved to visit the charity mentioned by Mrs. Patch, the Eden Trust for Veterans of Foreign Conflict, whose pamphlet still lay folded in my coat pocket like a quietly ticking clock. The next morning, beneath a dreary drizzle that had soaked the city in silence, I arrived at their listed address. A modest townhouse on Half Moon Street, its facade cleaner than its neighbors, the brass knocker freshly polished. A man with the look of an underpaid clerk answered the door, tall, bald, and dry as parchment. He blinked at me behind gold-rimmed spectacles. "Yes, Dr. John Watson," I announced. "Formerly of Her Majesty's Army. I was told the Eden Trust offers support to veterans." He hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. Please come in." The entrance hall smelled faintly of antiseptic and camphor. Portraits of heroic soldiers lined the walls, each too clean, too idealized. I was led to a waiting room, sparsely furnished but orderly. "If you'll wait here, Dr. Klempt will be down presently," the clerk said before disappearing up a narrow staircase. Left alone, I let my eyes wander, and my hands as well. Behind the secretary's desk lay a thick ledger, unattended. I opened it just enough to note that several pages had been torn from the center, cleanly, but hurriedly. The last visible entry, Graves, James. Intake noted. Status. Transferred. I closed the book as I heard footsteps returning, but not down the stairs. Instead, something scraped faintly behind the far wall. I rose, casually, and followed the sound to the corner of the room where the rug bunched unevenly near the baseboard. I crouched, pretending to tie my shoe, and caught sight of a faint iron seam beneath the carpet. A trapdoor. Before I could investigate further, the clerk returned. I must apologize, sir. Dr. Klempt is unavailable at present. Might you wish to return later? I rose. Another time, perhaps, I said mildly. May I leave a card? Of course. As he fetched the tray, I used the moment to sweep my gloved finger across the skirting board near the trapdoor's edge. It came away stained red-brown. Blood. I tipped my hat politely and departed, though I knew I would return. Outside, the fog had begun to lift, but a different kind of obscurity now shrouded my mind. What sort of institution for the healing of soldiers required secret compartments and torn ledgers? And what had become of those who were transferred? Back at Baker Street, I found Holmes absent once more, no doubt chasing the lingering tail of his engineer and his thumb. I was, again, alone. I took out my journal and wrote. The wound I saw today was not of war, nor accident. It was the wound left by silence. Graves was not mad. He had uncovered something, and the Eden Trust tried to bury him along with it. If Holmes had walked into that room, he might have noticed the irregularities in architecture. But it was I who recognized the scent, iron and iodine, the unmistakable spore of suffering. It was well past midnight when I returned to Half Moon Street, cloaked in darkness and the kind of silence only London keeps when asleep but not still. I wore a black overcoat and soft-soled shoes, my revolver holstered discreetly beneath my waistcoat. I had considered informing Holmes, but instinct and pride held me back. This was my pursuit. The rear alley gave access to a small service door. The lock was old, no match for a blade of stiffened wire and my surgeon's patience. Within moments, I was inside once more. The room I had visited earlier now seemed different in the moonlight, more clinical than charitable. I found the trapdoor again, now unobstructed. It opened with the reluctant groan of iron hinges long disused. A short iron stair descended into darkness. I lit a lamp, hooded and narrow, and descended, one hand on the wall for balance. The air changed as I went down, damp, heavy with rot and ether. At the base, I found a corridor crudely carved beneath the house. Wooden beams held back the walls of earth, while gaslights, wired crudely, sputtered along one side. At the end stood a door, ajar. Inside, I beheld a sight that halted me in my steps. 6 iron-framed beds lined the chamber, 3 to each side. The beds bore the imprint of recent use, sheets rumpled, restraints unbuckled. Trays of surgical tools sat on tables between them, clamps, syringes, tinctures, bottles of morphine, laudanum, and oddly, a sealed vial marked belladonna extract glinted under my lamp. This was no veteran's shelter. This was a ward. A clipboard hung at the foot of the last bed. Name, Graves, James. Condition, subject unresponsive to garden protocol. Showed signs of dissociation. Attempted escape. Sedated. Pending transfer. Beneath that, a date. Only 4 days prior. I turned to the opposite wall, lined with cabinets. Many were empty, but one drawer yielded a set of military dog tags. I turned one over and read the name aloud. James Edwin Graves. Suddenly, footsteps above. I extinguished the lamp. Darkness collapsed in around me like a tomb. The trapdoor above creaked open. A shaft of yellow light spilled down the stairwell. I pressed myself behind a cabinet as 2 figures descended slowly, conversing in hushed German. Müssen in Verlegen, one said. We must relocate him. Zu gefahrlich. Zu viel Gierde. Too dangerous. Spoke too much. I tightened my grip on the revolver. But they did not search the room. They examined a ledger, collected a tray of tools, and left as quietly as they had come. The trapdoor thudded closed. The bolt above turned. I exhaled slowly, heart thundering. After a moment's silence, I relit the lamp and made a final sweep of the room. I found a scrap of paper behind the headboard of Graves' bed. On it, hastily scrawled in pencil. They are not healers. They bury men and call it mercy. I tried to warn her. I slipped the paper and the tags into my pocket. I would not be buried. Not yet. Holmes had often spoken of the city's underbelly, but I now knew it in a manner he never had. Not from a map or a monograph, but from within. I was in the belly of something living, and it did not like to be seen. By the time I emerged from beneath the Eden Trust's foundations, the fog had thinned and dawn's pale fingers stretched over the rooftops. I hurried back to Baker Street under the gray hush of early morning, a curious weight in my coat pocket, military tags, and a dead man's warning. Holmes had not returned. His slippers remained where I had last seen them, neatly beside the fireplace, and his violin lay mute on its table. I took the opportunity to prepare my notes, sifting through each fragment as a surgeon might examine a shattered bone. Delicately, yet with intent to mend. But I could not shake the image of that ward, the sterile cruelty of it, the lies stitched into its very fabric. Nor could I ignore one unmistakable fact. James Graves had escaped, and someone was hunting him. I returned to Pimlico by noon and rapped once more on Mrs. Patch's door. Her eyes widened when she saw me, but I stepped past her before she could protest. "You told me he vanished," I said coldly, "but you did not say how." "I told you all I knew," she said, retreating into the parlor. "He left in the night." "No," I replied. "He was taken. Drugged. Removed by men you let in." Her lips parted, but no sound came. "I found the ward, Mrs. Patch. The so-called charity. I found his bed. His tags. Blood on the floor." She sank onto the settee, fingers knotting in her apron. "I never meant for harm," she said at last. "They said he'd be treated. That they'd help him." "Who?" "A Dr. Klempt," he said. "German, or maybe Austrian. Came here with 2 others. Said the war had damaged Graves in the mind. That they had a program." "Program?" I echoed, darkly. "Something to do with memories. Replanting, he called it. Like the soul was a garden. He paid me to keep quiet. And you took it." She gave a bitter laugh. "You think rent's free in this city, doctor?" I stepped toward her. "If Graves dies," I said, "you are as much his killer as any." She flinched. "He's not dead." I froze. "How do you know?" She hesitated, then leaned in. "Because 2 nights ago, he came back. Came back. Late. Knocked on the back door. I didn't open it. He was rambling, sweating like a fever. Said he had to find the letter, that he'd left something behind. When I looked again, he was gone." "What did he mean, the letter?" She shook her head. "I found nothing." I scanned the room, my eyes catching on the fireplace. Beside it stood a small table, its drawer warped, half open. I pulled it free. Beneath a scattering of old envelopes lay a folded scrap of parchment. I recognized the hand. Graves. I read it in silence. One phrase leapt from the page. "If I vanish again, tell her the key is in the roots. Eden is not what it seems." I turned to Mrs. Patch. "I must find him." She gave a helpless shrug. "Where does a madman go, doctor?" "To places where the sane won't follow," I murmured. But I would. I had already followed him into the dark, and I intended to bring him back into the light, or die trying. The Thames that evening was low and mean, its waters crawling like oil between the pilings. The tip from Mrs. Patch, that Graves had spoken of roots, struck me as metaphor, until I recalled what lay beneath the city. Not soil and trees, but tunnels. Old, forgotten tunnels. With Graves' dog tags in my pocket and his words echoing in my mind. The key is in the roots. I made my way to the dockyards south of Lambeth, where the old Victorian sewer lines converged in a net of long-abandoned passages. There, under cover of darkness, I enlisted the help of a boy no older than 15, smudged with soot, quick of foot, and sharper than most inspectors I'd met. He introduced himself as Reggie, cousin to Wiggins of Holmes's irregulars. "You pay me half now, doctor," he said, squinting with suspicion, "and I'll find the man you're after, if he's below ground." "Half now," I agreed, handing over 2 shillings. "Half again if we find him alive." That lit a fire behind the boy's eyes. Within the hour, We were slinking past rusted grates and descending into brickwork gloom, the damp chill of the tunnels clinging to our boots. Reggie led with a lantern. I followed with revolver drawn and nerves held tight as piano wire. "Heard of a man down here few days back," Reggie whispered. "Army coat, talked strange. Guards chased him off the Eden House property. They thought he was dead, but me and Alfie saw him slip down the flood shaft. Like he knew it already." We moved deeper. Eventually, we came to a disused chamber where the brick gave way to stone and the scent of mildew grew strong. There, hunched in the corner beside a crumbling iron pipe, I saw him, James Graves. His eyes were wide and glassy, his skin drawn and pale, but he still breathed. He cradled something in his hand like a relic, folded parchment, sodden but intact. "Graves," I said softly, kneeling beside him. "It's Dr. Watson. Helena sent me." He flinched, then looked up slowly. "She mustn't know," he croaked. "Not yet. Not till it's over. You're safe now," I said. "No one will harm you." He laughed bitterly. "Safe? There's no safety once you've been planted. They grow things in your mind, doctor. They twist the roots." "What did they do to you?" He pressed the parchment into my palm. "It's all in there. Names, locations, Klemp's journals. I took them, copied them, before they strapped me down. They think I'm just a ghost now. Let them." I scanned the page. It was coded, but clear in its structure. A mind trained in military protocol had written it. Graves was no madman. He was a witness, a survivor. Suddenly, Reggie hissed from the tunnel mouth. "Oi! Someone's comin'." "Help me lift him," I said quickly. Together, the boy and I hauled Graves to his feet. He staggered, but walked. We vanished into the tunnels before the echo of boots reached the chamber. Above us, London breathed in gaslight and indifference. Below, the truth rustled like vermin in the walls. But I had found him, and in his hands, he held the match to burn it all down. Graves lay on the cot in a quiet lodging I had secured through a trusted patient in Southwark, a widow of the 44th who asked no questions. I cleaned his wounds, eased the fever with quinine and broth, and watched over him as one watches a man who has walked too near the veil. On the second evening, as the fog pressed itself once more against the window panes, he stirred. "I thought I was still underground," he whispered. "You were," I said gently, "but not anymore." He turned his head toward me. "I didn't think anyone would come. Your wife did, and so I did." He nodded slowly. "I suppose that's the last thing they couldn't take from me. Hope." There was a pause. Then he gestured to the satchel at his side. "In there. My notes." I copied them in fragments. Klemp's files, his diagrams, the injections. He called it neurological renewal through traumatic erasure. Said we were lucky to be chosen. I opened the satchel and began to leaf through the pages. They were stained, hurried, some written on the backs of envelopes. But what they described chilled me. A government-sanctioned experiment, conducted in secret during the Afghan campaigns, selected soldiers subjected to chemical and psychological conditioning to dull fear, suppress memory, enhance obedience. They were drugged, broken, replanted, as Klempt called it. "You were part of this?" I asked quietly. "I volunteered for a surgery to help with tremors in my hand," Graves said. "Woke up seeing shapes. Lost days. Men screamed in languages I didn't know. Some didn't wake at all. And you escaped." I stole a copy of his ledger, took it to a journalist, but he was bought off or frightened. After that, they came. Said I was sick. Said I had to come back to complete the process. He laughed weakly. "I preferred the tunnels." I gripped his shoulder. "They won't find you again. You can't stop them, doctor." I stood and crossed to the hearth where a small fire burned. "Perhaps not, but I can expose them." He looked at me, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. "I shall go to Inspector Lestrade, carefully, discreetly. Scotland Yard may turn a blind eye to many things, but not murder, not medical butchery. And with your testimony and these notes." "Watson," he interrupted, "if you do this, you'll be watched too." I smiled faintly. "I already am." That night, I wrote 3 letters. one to Lestrade, unsigned but enclosing a summary of the evidence, one to The Lancet, with an anonymous medical commentary on neurological abuse in wartime, and one to Holmes. The last I sealed in my desk. If I disappear, tell Helena he lived with honor. Tell Holmes I tried, just once, to solve the mystery myself. And tell the world that a doctor saw something no detective did. Not footprints, nor ashes, nor cigar butts, but a man crying out beneath a white coat and a Latin motto. I would not let the shadow close over graves again. Not while I had breath to shine a light. It was just past midday, 3 days after my descent into London's underbelly, when the familiar staccato of footsteps echoed upon the stairwell of 221B. A moment later, Holmes swept into the sitting room in his characteristic storm of coat, cane, and questions. "Well, Watson," he began, doffing his gloves with absent-minded precision, "London has outdone itself this week in mechanical horrors. I have concluded the case of the mutilated engineer. Quite the contraption involved, I assure you. And what of you, my dear doctor? Have you managed to survive the stultifying tranquility of domestic solitude?" I looked up from my journal, composing myself before speaking. "I've not been entirely idle." Holmes raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement playing at the corners of his mouth. "Indeed? I trust the practice has not been so engaging as to keep you out at all hours? Mrs. Hudson mentioned you were abroad during 2 consecutive nights. Curious." "There are matters," I said evenly, "which required discretion." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "How very clandestine. Have you taken to moonlighting as a consulting detective in my absence?" I set down my pen. "I have, in fact, undertaken a private inquiry on behalf of a woman in distress. It was not something I sought, but something that found me." "Ah," he said, settling into his chair with feline grace. "A damsel, a mystery, and the good doctor driven by honor and perhaps, dare I say vanity?" I did not rise to the bait. A man's life was at stake. I followed the trail where it led. It was not a game. Holmes studied me then, more deeply, as though the mask of banter had dropped. "And did you succeed?" "I did," I replied, "though the cost was not inconsiderable." He leaned forward, fingers steepled. "I ask not in jest, Watson. Your manner has changed. Your hands bear new calluses. Your boots are stained with clay, not from any London street, I know. I smelled ether upon your coat last night and noted the absence of your revolver from its usual drawer. You've been beneath the city." I met his gaze. "There are truths buried down there, Holmes. Not puzzles, not amusements, but wounds, still bleeding." Holmes said nothing for a moment. Then, with unusual softness, he replied, "You are not wrong to chase the truth, Watson. But remember, it does not always wish to be found." "Nor do I," I said, "wish to find it always in your shadow." He regarded me, a long silence stretching between us. Then he stood, walked to the window, and looked out upon the street below. "You have changed," he said finally, "and I suspect not for the worse." Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "Should you ever wish for a partner in your investigations, you need only ask." I smiled. "Thank you, Holmes. But for now, I think I shall walk alone, just a little while longer." He turned, that old half-smirk returning to his face. "As you will, my friend. But do take care. The streets are never as empty as they seem." And in that moment, I saw not the world's greatest detective, but a man who, for the first time, saw me not merely as a chronicler, but as his equal. It was more reward than any laurel, and more dangerous than any bullet. I never told Holmes the whole of it. There are truths that must be spoken, and others that must be protected, like smoldering embers kept beneath ash, for fear of what they might rekindle. He never asked again, and I never offered. That, between us, was our unspoken agreement. Graves recovered slowly. I arranged for his care at a private convalescent home in Surrey under an assumed name. Helena visits him every week, though she believes he suffers from nothing more than a war-born affliction of the nerves. He speaks little, but his eyes have begun to clear. With time, I believe his mind will mend where once it was nearly torn apart. The Eden Trust was shuttered 2 weeks after I dispatched my anonymous packet to Scotland Yard. No names were given in the press. Only vague references to irregularities in the administration of care to returning veterans. Dr. Klempt vanished from the country like a shadow in a high wind. Whether he escaped justice or merely delayed it, I cannot say, nor do I wish to pursue it further. Holmes remarked, some days later as we shared a quiet breakfast, that the Lancet had published an odd editorial on ethical boundaries in experimental neurology. He did not press the matter. He merely stirred his tea and murmured, "The world is full of physicians with too much theory and too little heart." I raised my cup in silent toast. He did not meet my eye, but I thought I saw him smile. The documents I recovered from graves, the journals, the encoded notes, the maps of tunnel networks, and the list of patients who never returned, remain locked in a drawer beneath my writing desk. Perhaps one day, when the world is less vulnerable to monsters and white coats and mottos in Latin, they will be read aloud in court. But not yet. As I sit now at Baker Street, Holmes pacing behind me and the evening's paper rustling in his hand, I turn this final page with a kind of peace. I have walked the path he walks, seen the city through a darker lens, and I have not flinched. I have carried the lantern when none offered light. I will always be a doctor. That is my oath. But there are days, quiet days, when Holmes is away and the fire crackles low, when I glance toward the drawer that holds this journal and think, for one case, I was the detective. And in that case, I did not fail. For one case, Watson didn't just write the story, he lived it. He followed the darkness alone and brought the truth into the light. Thank you for joining us in this untold chapter of Baker Street. If you enjoyed the journey, please like the video, leave a comment about your favorite moment, and subscribe for more hidden tales from the world of Sherlock Holmes and beyond.